Hello, and welcome to Making Known the Unknown, Ignorance, the Mother of Devotion. I'm your host, Tina Tarryk, and with me are my panel of experts. I used to call them guests, but they're here for quite a while, and they're here to stay. First, I'll introduce Mr. Sidney Schwartz, middle school teacher and lifetime Bible researcher from Hackensack, New Jersey. Welcome, Sidney.
Hi, Tina.
And Reverend Carl Hewitt, founder of Gifts of the Spirit Church in Chesterfield, Connecticut, and also a very well-known medium. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we jump into the show, there's something special I wanted to share with our viewers there that is unbeknownst to my panel of experts. And one of our panel members is celebrating a birthday this week. So what we wanted to do is share with all of you viewers out there a little bit of a happy birthday, and that's a happy birthday for Carl Hewitt.
It's not a birthday, it's an anniversary.
And so we have a little cake here.
Oh my God. I don't believe this.
I'll take the cake this way. Thank you. Oops. Make sure it doesn't slide.
I'm glad you done put candles on it. It would look like the San Francisco fire.
And so I wish you a very happy birthday,
Thank you.
Carl. And I'm sure all of our viewers who know Carl and are tuning in wish to extend their congratulations to you.
I can
as
see
well.
them running up and turning the set off. Every one of them.
They're disappointed they can't have a piece of cake.
Yeah. Well, come on down to the studio after the show, and it is live tonight, and we'll be glad to share the cake with you. Okay.
Thank you.
And of course, if you know Carl and you forgot it was his birthday, there's no excuse. So give him a call. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Let's see. We're live. This is the third season. For all of you callers out there, or viewers who may not call, the number is at the bottom of the screen, or it should be shortly. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions for either Sidney Schwartz or Carl Hewitt, and I think you'll find that these are two very fascinating people with an awful lot of knowledge to share. There's the number, 889-1728. We'll be live during the entire show. One of the comments that I get quite often from people is that, oh, I was going to call, or, oh, I thought about this and thought about calling, but then I didn't. And one thing I want to remind the viewers is that if it's comfortable, you don't have to give your name. The important part is that you have a question answered and that you begin to open up your mind with some of the information that we like to share with you. And with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Reverend Hewitt, who I would like to have explain, especially for those of you who are first-time viewers, all of these different pictures that we have here on the set tonight, how they came to be, and for that matter, how this show came to be. So sit back and enjoy. Carl?
Thank you. Well, first of all, most people know that I'm a medium, but if you go back a couple thousand years ago, mediums were known then as prophets, seers, oracles. There were many different labels to describe a person who had the gifts of the Spirit. Jesus was also called a prophet in his day, but in his day he taught the gifts of the Spirit. And if anyone is interested, all they have to do is read Corinthians in the Bible. And if you go to chapter 12 in the Bible, it says, "Thou shalt not have you ignorant of the gifts of the Spirit." And so my father did not understand that I was born with the gift of the Spirit. And when I was a child, strange things happened at my house, which the spirit people that knew me before I was born, they were trying to be recognized by my parents, and just like all other mediums that I've ever known. But my father thought that any of this phenomena was the working of the devil. And in fact, the period of time that I was in the womb, My father was clairaudient, which means clear hearing, hearing voices. And just like Joan of Arc heard voices, and she followed the advice and followed the directions that they were telling her to do. And so my father thought that this was the devil, because this is the way he was taught at in the Baptist church. And so all these strange things were happening, and lights appeared on the walls, and then when the lights disappeared, you touched the wall, and the wall was warm. And then there was a period of writing appeared on the wall, and of different languages. My father would always say it was of another tongue. And so in 1982, when I was working in Charleston, South Carolina, and there were so many people that that the program wound up at the Civic Center, and when it was all over with, all the people had rented a large, very large restaurant. It was a Chinese restaurant, and when we finished there, they brought out these fortune-telling cookies, of which I don't have too much confidence in. And they came out in baskets and gave everybody a fortune teller cookie. And I said, well, let's have some fun with these. And so I told people not to break any of them open. And when I had the lady next to me open one, and we went all the way around the room, the way the tables were set up, so it was like a great big huge horseshoe. And I opened mine last. Everybody in the room, their paper was white, and when it came to mine was green. That message that's on that sign right there says, "You will be the what is it?
The shining star?
You will be the shining star of his existence in the near future." Well, I started shaking because I had never seen anything like that before. And later I was told that that was through precipitated art, which I didn't know that much about it until I heard about another medium in Indiana as you see on the screen there, you will be the guiding star of his existence in the near future.
Could I interrupt you for just a moment,
Sure.
please, Carl? Viewers, this that you're looking at is the actual fortune cookie
Yes.
message that came through.
That's right.
And I challenge any of you out there who have looked at fortune cookie messages. Number one, this is green. Number two, I don't think you'll ever see that kind of message
That kind of
duplicated or repeated
No.
as they pull from different pots of different basic messages to give to people.
And lots of times fortune cookies have red writing on white paper. Most of them are always that color.
Absolutely. So that was very unusual. Now, you talked about precipitated art, if you want to continue from
Well,
there.
first of all, something I would never do. I took it and put it in my wallet. I would have never done this before. I put it in my wallet, and I carried it in my pocket from 82 until 99, you know, how many years is that? Until this one, that one there appeared.
So the one behind you in
That one appeared.
1999.
And
Okay.
then in 2000, this one appeared here, see?
Okay.
And he was talking to me in perfect English, and I kept asking, "Who are you?" And he would not. He said, I will tell you in time." And then when he did tell me who he was, I refused to accept it because I did not think I was worthy of that. And he filled me in with a lot of things, and I had a lot of trouble accepting this.
Now, just to also get our viewers up to speed here, precipitated art is a type of
Gifts of the Spirit.
gift of the Spirit.
That's right.
Okay.
It has to be done in the darkness, but it's done in a chamber, let's say in a box where it's absolutely pitch black inside, not in a dark room, as some people would say. And you take I'm not that kind of a medium. I can't do that. But there's a medium in Indiana, and we went out there. We even changed our names so that no one would recognize who we were. I was afraid somebody would recognize if they heard my name, so I changed my name. And this man used a box. He put 3x5 cards in it, and crayons and colored pencils, and everything was legit. And we sat there with 20 other people, and he went into trance and read for everybody in the room, and then it was all over with. Sometimes you could hear a noise inside of the box, light noise like scratching, and then when it was all over with and he'd open it, everybody in the room would have a card and their name would be on it on one side, and you flip it over and you get these pictures here.
Thank you. So now this backdrop here
Yes.
that has the title of the show on it,
Right.
these are also precipitated art cards.
Absolutely.
Most of them are,
From,
yes.
from people who came to seances.
Yes.
You call them seances, okay. And these happened because I also participated in a
That's
couple
right.
of those, so I've witnessed this myself.
Right.
So these are cards from other people who've given you permission
Right.
to use theirs for the title.
The four corners have the church logos on it, though that's not precipitated art, and the one of the flowers on the grave is also an actual photograph, but
Okay.
all the rest of them are precipitated art.
Thank you.
See,
Sidney.
I had this man, I paid all of his expenses to get him here to demonstrate that particular gift of the Spirit. I will never have anybody come unless they're genuine, because this is what I teach. I teach the gifts of the Spirit. And there's a lot of people that have the potential to be an instrument of the Spirit. In other words, a medium. And if I find somebody, I will ask them to come to the class. And it's a slow process for a person to develop. And the reason that the people in the other dimension wanted this program to take place in this city is simply because there was a very famous medium that started out right here in Norwich that I bet you anything, hardly anyone in this city knows anything about that. And this was, what was his name?
Daniel Douglas Holmes.
Daniel Douglas Holmes, who lived in this city when it wasn't called Norwich. It was
Called Greenville.
Greenville.
Okay.
Greenville, Connecticut, before it was really called Norwich. He was a very famous, there's still a lot of old books around about him. He could levitate his body and drift right up and out of a window and come in another window. It was fantastic. The family in Manchester that made parachutes for the wars, World War I, World War II, they had him in their home in Manchester.
Wow.
And he was very famous. There was also, there's a tombstone right down here on Route 32 that shows about 5 or 6
People who were
people
yeah.
that were burned at the stake here. Now, a lot of people are shocked when they hear this. Right here in Waterford, there were people burned at the stake because they were mediums. And the people in the other dimension talked to me about this. They wanted this program here in this area because of this happening years ago here. There's a reason for this program being televised right here in Norwich.
And thank you. Now, I, being a producer,
That's right.
saw the information that you had and thought that it shouldn't just stay within a smaller group of people and that the public deserved to hear this.
That's right.
And the title came through, Making Known the Unknown.
They told me that they influenced the people in this studio, they influenced you, they influenced him. Because don't forget, when he first came to me in 1975,
Yep.
he was a skeptic. He was a scoffer. He came to prove to his girlfriend in college that there's no such thing. He was trying to prove that I was a fraud. And I would stake my life on it. I don't believe there's a priest, minister, rabbi out there anywhere on this planet that knows more about the Bibles than he knows. And I mean Bibles, plural, not just one. He has more Bibles than they've got in a Bible factory. I'm not kidding you. Not just one kind of Bible, but all kinds.
Thank you. So now our viewers can get a sense of what all of this art is on the set. And one thing that I firmly believe in is not just having something here without people understanding really what it's about. I don't believe in using false pictures or images without some type of a foundation of the truth and how they came to be. And we'll probably revisit this in other shows because as new viewers tune in, they'll probably want to know, who painted these lovely pieces of art? Who did these, you know,
They were
in the physical?
Never touched by human hands.
Right.
This artwork, never.
Right.
This painting in front of us, it was done by a human artist.
Right, okay.
Yes, that was.
This
you.
one was the message that was on that Carl received on the fortune cookie.
Okay.
But other than that, they're all by spirit.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That, you know, that alone is a topic for many of our viewers who are curious about this or amazed with this that they could call and comment on. So obviously, if we jump into other topics tonight, and we do have an actual topic for tonight's show to keep our focus, please don't hesitate to call with respect to any questions about anything that we're talking about in this show, past shows, or maybe something we haven't talked about in a show. Ask, and you never know what the answer might be. Also, to remind our viewers that we have established an email address that you'll see at the end of the show, along with the address and phone number for Gifts of the Spirit Church. And that's making_known@yahoo.com. And there's the information right there. And that's precisely for the purpose of gathering feedback, ideas, suggestions, what have you, for the show. So don't be shy with that either.
I would like to say
Okay.
one other thing.
Go
This
ahead.
is a shocker to the viewers.
Okay.
I do not have a belief system. I have a knowingness system. And that is a bold statement. I do not have, I'm coming from a Baptist family. My whole family was Baptist. But I do not have a belief system. I have a knowingness system. And that's why he appeared to me. That's why he's talked to me. And it would blow anybody's mind if they really knew all the things that he's told me about. He told me he never taught a religion. And so there's people that have come to my church to see these pictures, one in particular from this area, and she was so shook up that he appeared to me, and because I wasn't Catholic, and I pointed to the picture and I said, "Lady, he wasn't Catholic either." And that shocked that lady so much, I thought she was going to faint right there.
Well, we hope that none of our viewers faint.
Right.
If you're sitting down, or if you're not sitting down, maybe you should be sitting down if you watch the show and you feel that come over you. But what we really suggest you to do is to call us and ask those questions. I think this is the perfect medium to do this with, because you can call anonymously. I'm not going to know who you are. No one else, on the panel here will know who you are. And you're free to ask anything in the world that you'd ever wanted to ask. And believe me, I talk to many adults out there who grew up having no clue what they're about to go to church, having no clue what the Bible or Bibles are about, never mind all the different religions. So take a chance. You've got nothing to lose. You've only got the opportunity to open up your mind.
One other thing, there are 12,000 religions on the planet. 12,000.
That's a lot of different beliefs.
And this trip I've just come from, which was not a vacation, I very seldom ever take a vacation. I go on trips to learn things. And I went to Brazil to visit that great healer that you went to visit, because you went down to check it out yourself to see if it was for real.
Yes, I did.
And I went down there myself, and this young man from Ireland came alongside of me. I was out for a little walk. I needed my space, and he walked alongside of me, and he says, I understand that you are a pastor of a church. I thought all the time I was by myself. And I said, yeah. And he says, you're also a medium. I says, no, today I'm well done. I just didn't want to get into it, you know. And he said, I stopped in America. I stopped in the States before coming down here to Brazil. And he said, you know, he says, I was shaking my head. He says, I can't believe what goes on in America. I said, what do you mean? He says, in my country, which is Ireland, he says, our government controls the radio waves and the television. And he said, they wouldn't allow what goes on in America. I says, what do you mean? He says, you're TV evangelist. He says, you have so many ignorant people in America that feeds these people money, and they fly all over the world in their jet planes and their big cars and their yachts and everything else in the name of God, in the name of Jesus. I said, yeah, that is a problem. He says, how about you? I says, I've never asked anybody for money yet. I says, the church I have, I've done it on my own. That's why I don't have a cathedral. I says, we still meet in the basement. And I says, if I ever have a church, I will pay for it myself. I says, I have a little bit of money in a building fund, but I says, probably just about enough to start the frame of a building, but I says, I don't think that people would be too comfortable setting in just the frame of a building. I said, maybe someday we'll have the money. But I said, I'm not going to ask the people the way these other people are doing. I said, I just don't. I said, I'm like the man that turned over the money changers. Mm. I said, he did all of his services and everything else outdoors. And I said, he was a wonderful man. And I says, he didn't teach a religion. He taught the gifts of the Spirit.
And again, you're referring to Jesus.
Absolutely.
So our viewers know that.
I can't wait to get into that pamphlet you got over there.
Okay. We will do that, I promise.
Okay.
But I feel like we've stolen from our viewers the opportunity to have a topic for focus tonight. And we are going to do that. And we may, in fact, if we don't have enough time to complete this or get through this like we really want to, we may just continue this topic into the next show, which is fine because there's always plenty of time to talk about this. Our topic for tonight, believe it or not, is women and the Bible. And that's a topic that after I had become acquainted with Reverend Hewitt and Sidney Schwartz, had come to my thoughts because through meeting them and speaking to them, I found that there are very, very few instances where women are mentioned in the Bible, never mind by name, but just that women are mentioned. And then that opened up a whole can of worms about women with religion and what positions or parts they play or don't play. And then some of those foundations seem to possibly lead to the way women are regarded or not regarded with respect to all the religions around the world. And I know that was a big can of worms to open, but I thought it was something that our viewers deserved to hear about. Not just women, but anybody out there who's interested in the history of the Bible or the history of actually what goes on today and where it came from, as far back as the Bible and maybe even before that. So now, what I'm going to do is turn that difficult task over to Sidney Schwartz to begin with his knowledge with respect to women and the Bible. Sidney.
Well, I think to start that particular topic, we might want to go before the Bible.
Okay.
And go back into the Stone Age from the research that I've done. Originally, the first societies that were created were matriarchal, meaning that the women were in control of society. In other words, when property was transmitted from one generation to the other, it passed through the female line, mother to daughter, not father to son. And we have to remember that back in the Stone Age, The women remained at home. They might attend to the gardens and things that they did have, as much as gardening as they did originally, but most food was gotten by hunting. And the men were the ones who left the home and went out to hunt for food and come back. But there was no guarantee that they would come back. I mean, things could happen. They could be killed by a big animal or whatever. So it was just natural for these early families to be matriarchal. And then when the Bronze Age came around 4000 BC, man, again, I should say humans, not men, but people began living in cities. They started to establish cities, and then they had different requirements. In the cities, cities needed to be protected. There needed to be walls around the cities to protect them, because if there was a neighboring city, they could come in and conquer you, and if they conquered you, they turned you into a slave, and you had to go work for this other society. So it became very important to protect the city from outsiders, and therefore armies were established. And since men are physically stronger than women, men's importance started to become more. Men started to become more important and valued, because they had to protect the city. And that's when patriarchal societies began, and women's role then began to diminish.
Okay. I'd like to continue from where
Sure.
you were speaking right now, and that is fascinating. I didn't realize that alone, that there was a switch from matriarchal, to patriarchal.
Right.
But I want you to hold that thought for a moment,
Okay.
because we have a couple callers on the line.
Good.
So we're going to take our first caller right now. Go ahead, caller.
Carl,
Carl, this caller would like to speak to you.
Yes, go ahead.
what did the people in the other dimension say to you?
What do the people in the other dimensions say to you? I think we have a young caller here, Carl.
What is the question?
This young caller would like to know, what do the people in the other dimensions say to you?
They talk to me just like they would talk to me here if they were in the physical. Because we're born with two bodies. We're born with a physical body and we're born with a spiritual body. And the moment that we die, the moment that the physical body dies, it gives birth to the spiritual body. And that's what is meant by everlasting life. So they talk to me about anything. For instance, if I was going to take an airplane and there was going to be a problem with the airplane, they would tell me about it. Just like the time that Sidney and I were going to go to Israel, was it? Mm-hmm. And they told me not to go to Israel on that plane. And I called Sidney and told him that we can't take that plane, and we cancel. And that was the plane that was hijacked, and it was the TWA, and it was hijacked, see? So it's just like the neighbor telling me.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say happy birthday to Carl.
Oh.
What was this?
Yes, I wish
the
you a
caller
happy
wanted to say
birthday.
happy birthday to
Well,
you.
thank you very much.
Thank you, caller.
Yeah.
All right, take care. So that's interesting. We had a very young person call in because
Sure.
they're curious about
I like
what
it
do
when,
they tell you?
I like it when young people are curious about that.
That's good. That's good. And whoever the parents or guardians are of these children that allow them to actually ask these questions,
Yes.
I give kudos to them as well to do that.
Absolutely.
Looks like we have a caller on another line. Can I get a confirmation of that? No, we don't. Okay, just wanted to be sure. So now we'll go back to Sidney with the shift of the matriarchal to patriarchal
Right.
society, with the onslaught of wars or battles or defense.
Oh, defense mostly, yes, and as you said, wars. Yeah, before that point, when it was a matriarchal society, the main gods were goddesses, and women were the priestesses, and they were in charge of all spirituality. And of course, that also changed because when male dominance started, they decided to have male gods and their male priesthood and so forth. The excuse that the men used to kind of subordinate women, is that the right way to say that, was that since now property was going to be transmitted from father to son, there was no real way to know who the father was of a child. Everyone knew who the mother was, but it was hard to tell who the father was. So in order for a man to know that the child was his, he started to guard his wife much more, and he made her wear veils to go out, when she went out in public, so therefore no other man would be attracted to her. She had to have a chaperone if she was to leave the house. So the personal freedom of women began to diminish because the men had to make sure that the woman was not being unfaithful to him, and that the child that would come forth was actually his.
Now, in what parts of the world or what time are you talking about right now?
Well, the only date that I found here was 4000 BC, and it was after this part. Basically in the Middle East, but then it started there, but it spread all around the world. That it was kind of like just a shift in consciousness that this all started. And so that's how women started to lose all this, and then the men took over the religions, and with the gods and so forth.
So now, I guess we could try to bring it up to Genesis in the Bible when we speak of Adam and Eve and the beginning of all time, supposedly, or of all human beings.
I was just reading about that the last day or so, and basically, the way theologians view it is that they acknowledge that women are more intuitive, they're more psychic, they're more open to spirituality and communication with the other world, but most Orthodox religions put a negative spin on it. And they say that since they believe that this is all coming from the devil, which it actually isn't, because the devil was created, and it was created to make people fearful of the gifts of the Spirit so that they wouldn't use them and follow the priest blindly. But therefore, the women were supposedly easier tempted by the devil, and because Eve, the whole story of Adam and Eve was created to put women down. It was Eve who listened to the serpent, who in some interpretations is the devil, and she transgressed what God wanted by eating the apple and giving it to Adam. So it was viewed as the woman was the weaker sex because they were following the devil. Basically, that's what this was all about, and there really isn't anything to substantiate that story. I mean, it's a wonderful story to use to suppress women's power, but it's probably a fable.
Okay.
It is a fable. I asked Joshua ben Joseph, and he said it was all made up.
Joshua ben Joseph is
Jesus.
Jesus.
Yes.
For those of you who, if you hear that name, that's his official Hebrew name,
that's
right?
his Hebrew name that he had when he walked on earth.
Okay.
Incidentally, he said there was no such place as Nazareth. A lot of people said
Really?
Jesus of Nazareth. There was no such place as Nazareth. He was a Nazarene, and a Nazarene was a group of people that got together and they studied the gifts of the Spirit.
Goodness.
Yes.
It was a label of a group of people.
Yes, it was.
So he was one of that group.
He was one
Samson was also a Nazarene.
That's
and
Really?
The Nazarenes didn't cut their hair; they had long hair.
That's
They were
right.
supposed to refrain from wine.
That's right.
And lots of other restrictions on them.
And we've heard the stories of Samson and Delilah,
Right.
and then cutting the hair.
Yeah.
So, but they don't say Samson of Nazarene, do they?
No.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Learn something new every day, especially on this show. Okay, so now we're up to Adam and Eve, which is pretty much known to be a fable.
Right.
But overall, through any readings, any citations in the Bible at all, you don't hear much about women, just the word
No.
woman or women.
Right.
And you don't see any specific names of any women either.
Well,
what's up with that?
Well, in the Old Testament, in the beginning parts, the more historical parts, they do mention the women, but basically they're the wives of the patriarchs, and they're the ones that bore the children. They really don't have a prominent role in bringing any kind of teachings or anything through, until you finally get to Miriam, who was Moses' sister. She was clairaudient, and she was able to hear the voice of Spirit or the voice of God. Deborah, the judge, she judged the people. She used to sit out by the palm tree and near the palm tree because trees enhance psychic energy. And she was like a prophet. They would come with their problems to her, and she would give an answer. But on a whole, you don't see women having a central role of authority at all through the Bible. They're always kind of in a secondary position, partially because the religions were patriarchal and they didn't want the women to be prominent, because it goes back to the conflict between the priest and the medium. The priests wanted total control. They wanted they wanted to be the intermediaries between the people and the spirit world. But most of them weren't gifted, and therefore the prophets were the gifted people. They were the ones that could hold a two-way conversation. When it talks about in Exodus chapter 33, it says that Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the tent, and anyone who had a question would go out to the tent of meeting and ask it to the Lord. Well, that's because they got a two-way conversation going. They would ask the question, and there was a medium there, and the spirit person would speak through the medium and give them an answer. So it was a two-way conversation between a physical person and someone in the other dimension. But the priests couldn't do that. They could imitate it, but they couldn't do it. So they were afraid of the women, and they didn't want the women to be in a place of authority, because it was more likely that a woman was a medium, because they are more sensitive to the spirit world and could bring forth messages. And this is why when Christianity was established and Paul came around, he in the 15th chapter of the book of Corinthians, it talks about a woman must be silent in the church because she has to be subordinate. If she wants to find anything out, she has to ask her husband at home. She's not allowed to speak in church. It's shameful for a woman to speak in church. That's around verse 35 of the 15th chapter of Corinthians. So they actually forbid women to speak in church, and that one line went throughout history. Carl and I went to Saratoga, New York, and that is there's a museum there about women's history. And it was there that I learned, because I wasn't aware of this, but before 1880, a woman could not speak in public. I mean, not even in church. She couldn't go into a public auditorium and address a crowd of people. That was forbidden, because women weren't allowed to talk in public and address people. And Katie Stanton broke that barrier down. They held a convention there, and women were speaking, and that was the first time that really happened. And that's why that museum's there, in that town.
And that's here in the United States.
That's here in the United States in the 1880s. So throughout all these centuries of time, women have been gagged in silence.
Okay, now Carl, what is your take on why women have seemingly not been regarded in religions?
Women are more sensitive to the working of spirit, to the spirit world, than men, down through the ages. And when we talked about the crossovers and how those little girls were treated by the priests back there in that period in Turkey, saying that females were born without a soul, and how they had to put the soul in the females, and then when the souls came back, they crossed over, and which caused homosexuality. Those people became more sensitive and became better mediums, because here is a person, here's a male with a soul that is female, more sensitive than a female, more sensitive than a male.
Okay.
See what I mean? And so this has been proven. The man down south, Mr. Belk, Henry Belk, he's a researcher, owned all the big stores down south, very wealthy. He heard about me in London, contacted me, came up to see me several times, invited me. I've spent a lot of time with him. Researcher, not a medium, researcher. And boy, if he found anybody that was pretending to be a medium, he went right for their jugular vein. And he told me that all over the world, and he had research centers all over the world, and he said that 99% of the males all over the world, good mediums now, were gay.
Oh, really?
99% of them were gay. Okay. They were born that way.
Okay.
Because the soul had crossed over.
Right.
They were born that way. And he said that their research, he said it was like you can't change the color of their eyes any more than you can, you know?
Right.
They were born that way. And he says it was the ignorance of the people. And he said that if religions would do their homework, they would find out a great deal, like he did his homework.
Right.
Because he started by this medium in Georgia, this elderly medium in Georgia. She was originally a daughter of a slave. She never had a day's, not one day's schooling. But she would go into trance, had a Bible on her lap, she'd go into trance, and she would give fabulous readings. And he couldn't believe that all of these millionaire friends of his would go there to seek advice from this woman who had never had a day's education. And he went there with a fictitious name, and she read for him, and he could not believe that she told him all about his daughter that got drowned several years earlier. And it was then that he decided to go do some research, and he did. And he said that going way, way back, women were more sensitive, so women were the mediums way, way back until the crossover started coming on.
Oh, I see.
See?
Oh.
And then the priest got jealous of them because they were better prophets than the priests were.
And so maybe this could have also been an indirect way to keep people who were homosexual down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Out
a
of the
burn
church
them
as
at
well.
the stake.
Right.
Okay.
was-
And we're going to get to that too, with the connection
yeah.
of witches and so
Sure.
on.
Yeah, it was politically
Okay.
incorrect for them to say they were going after the prophets because the prophets were supposed to be the mouthpiece for God.
Yeah.
But since most of the prophets were gay, they could go after the homosexuals and eliminate the competition, which was the prophets.
Didn't quite a few kings throughout history go to prophets to get answers?
Oh,
like,
sure.
am I going to win this battle? Am I going to, be heir to the throne?
The King Saul, when he was having a problem, went to a medium of Endor, which we were going to talk about more in depth next week. And here's one case where the Bible doesn't even mention her name. However, the Midrash, which is other Jewish writings, has her name as Zephaniah. There's lots of information in the Midrash that was eliminated from the Bible. So they knew the information, but they didn't include it in the Bible. The same thing happened with the other king, later on, Josiah. The high priest Hilkiah came to him saying, "This is a scroll we found in the temple, and we're not following the law." And the first thing he said was, "Well, let's go take this to a prophet." And they actually took it to a woman. Her name was Helda. And they asked her, "Is this scroll legitimate?" And she said no. She said, "No, it's not." But yet it became the book of Deuteronomy.
You said a couple of things there now. Carl, did you want to add something to that before I ask Sidney about these different books that he's coming up with?
Well, I mean, if you go all the way back there, you'd find out that there was a lot of women that were very, very famous in those days, but they would never use their name.
Right.
They would just simply call them a witch or a woman. But the shocker that I'm holding back here of what Joshua ben Joseph said, which is going to be a shock to the viewers watching this program, that he told me he was married. And he was married to the other Mary, which was Mary
Magdalene. Mary Magdalene.
Mary Magdalene.
Right.
That was his wife.
Okay.
But all through the Bible, they always say the other Mary. That was his wife.
Oh, I see.
And he had two
two.
children. The first child was a little girl, and the second one was a boy.
Really?
Yeah. And they were very much in love. And he explained that when they were making love, either one of them was pretending or dreaming of anybody else.
Now, first of all,
I think he was trying to get a message across to us.
yeah, first of all, just speaking about Jesus in human terms, like
Yes.
we would speak about our friends or
Right.
ourselves,
Yeah.
is already difficult. But then you made a reference to something much more intimate, which I'm sure would be difficult for our viewers to absorb. But that's okay. That's why we're making known the unknown. Thank you. Now, Sidney, you
Yes.
mentioned a couple of books. The what was the first one?
The Book of Deuteronomy?
No, the books that weren't included in the Bible.
Oh, you mean the Midrash?
The Midrash?
Yes.
And what was the other one?
Well, there's the Mishnah, the Talmud. These
Okay.
are all writings that the rabbis did at a certain point in
Okay.
history, from about the 2nd century to the 11th century. And it was the oral traditions of the Bible stories, but it contains a lot more detail than was actually found in the Bible.
So you're getting a lot of detail with respect to women,
Yes.
specifically names and maybe more about what was going on there from these other books.
Right.
And these other books were even in a limited sense included in the Bible or not at all?
Oh, they're
the
separate from
book
the
we know
Bible.
is the Bible. Okay.
They're
All right.
tangential.
Okay. All right.
In the second book of Samuel, in chapter 14, there's a reference to a wise woman who there was several of them. She lived in a place called Token, I believe, or something like that. So I'm sure that they knew what her name was, but they didn't want to put it into the Bible. And the fact that they call her a wise woman, I looked it up in the Hebrew, and it's a literal translation of what is in the Hebrew. It's a wise woman.
Okay.
And it's another example where they didn't put the name in. They didn't want to give the women enough credit. They didn't want to humanize her, by acknowledging that what she had not done or what she knew.
Now, what that leads me to think is that the reason why some of the religions today don't want women to become priests is because they'll outdo the male priests. Is that plausible? Is that possible?
What might happen is if they're in the church, they might slide into the altered state of consciousness, go into trance, and some great entity, advanced entity in the other dimension take over their body. And can you imagine them doing this lecture or this sermon that would overpower everything else that these people had ever heard? Can you imagine the building falling in?
I can imagine it would be pretty great. So what's the
I
problem?
think so too.
What's the problem?
If you go back into history, in the city of Alexandria, this was about in the 300s to 400s time frame, there was a woman called Hypatia. She was not really a medium that I know of. She was a mathematician. And people from the whole world used to come to listen to her because she was so profound in her knowledge, and what she was lecturing was so great that people came from all over the known world to listen to her lecture. Her problem became that she believed in the goddess, and she was also talking about the attributes of the goddess and goddess worship. And that was in the time where the Christianity was starting to want to control people's minds. And the bishop of the city, whose name I believe was Cyril, he decided that he had enough of her teachings because they were heretical to the church, and they went and they hijacked her off her chariot. They dragged her into the church. They tied her to the altar, and they took seashells and they gouged her body until she died.
Oyster shells.
Yeah.
You're kidding.
No. And this is all found in history books. And she was such a wonderful teacher, profound.
They skinned her alive
Yep.
on the altar.
This makes me think of Joan of Arc. And we
Yeah.
did a show and we talked
Right.
a little bit
Terrible.
about that
It
too.
was terrible.
Yep.
Because a religious group was threatened.
Yes.
You would think that they would stand to gain much more by incorporating these people who have gifts rather than alienating them.
Right.
But somehow or other, it's still kept strong today for some reason or other.
Yes.
And in some religions, women can only go as far as being nuns.
Unless they become a saint.
Unless they become a saint.
And most of the saints, most of the female saints were gifted in some way, but they were able to walk the fine line of staying within the church doctrine enough so that they became a saint. But in order to become a saint, you have to do a miracle, and miracles are psychic phenomena. So you can't get around it.
Or they'd have to be careful because they might be referred to as a witch, right?
Yes.
That wasn't too long ago in our history
No, it
and
wasn't.
time.
It wasn't.
I understand you have some interesting definitions with respect to Wicca and witches and some foundation of that. I think we have a little bit of time to touch on that.
Right.
We'll probably not get into the meat of it until the next show. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, the word wizard, it comes from the word Wicca, which means wise one. It's the same root word as Hayidanim, which is in the Hebrew, which is referring to certain mediums, and that has the root word Yodea, to know. So they are the wise ones.
Okay.
The word witch is the same thing, only that's female. So it's talking about people who are wise.
Okay. We are going to get into, because I've always wondered, you've talked about people being burned at the stake, referred to as witches. There's a show also, or many shows, I should say, that involve Wicca and witchcraft and so on and so forth. And that seems to also overlap with the respect to women in religion.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about that in a little more detail in the next show. But before we continue, there was something that was brought to my attention by a coworker of mine, and I showed it to Reverend Hewitt here before the start of the show. And what I'd like to do is share this with our viewers and get Carl's take on this. What this is a flyer that was handed out to my friend, and it's a very interesting flyer distributed by a local church. And I was just told that we have one caller on the line. So what I'm going to do is give this to you, Carl. We're going to take the call, and then we're going to come back to what your take is on this this item that was sent out. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, caller. Go ahead, caller. Are you there?
Yes, hi, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. Fine. How are you?
Good. Hey, listen, I haven't seen your program too many times, but this is about the fourth or fifth time, and I'm going to go back possibly maybe 2 or 3 months ago, where one of the most interesting things came up when a statement was made that whatever heaven is, wherever we're going to go, and whatever that's going to happen to be, we're going to be 30 years old. I believe one of you gentlemen made that statement, which
Yes.
I loved, because no one's ever been able to answer that for me. And I've always wondered, with all the suffering done in the world, when a little baby dies and somebody 95-year-old dies, and right in between, I mean, okay, if we're all going to go there, and if it's all really going to happen, wherever it may be, whether it be here or there, what age are we going to be? And could you define that? I'll hang up, but could you explain that a little bit more? I really found that fascinating. I'm a Methodist. I don't practice very well at being one, but I've never had my minister at any age ever tell me anything like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We actually only have a couple minutes left to the show, so what I'm going to do is turn that over to Carl quickly if we have time.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Okay, the soul records from the time we're born until the time we're about 30 years old, and when we die, our body, our spirit body, never looks over 30 years old. Even if we die at 90 or 100 years old, in the world of spirit, we never look over 30 years old. And the soul remembers that very, very well.
This is why old people still feel young at heart, because the soul's really at 30, even though the body may be at 85.
That's right. If a baby dies at only a few weeks old, it grows up to be about 30 in the spirit world.
Okay. Our viewer had hung up with respect to the fact
Yeah.
that we're running out a little bit of
Right.
time.
Okay.
So hopefully that satisfies that
Yeah.
question. Go ahead, Carl.
In regards to this this folder here, this is pertaining to, you have to believe, or you have to accept Jesus Christ in order to live beyond death.
Okay.
Now, I asked the people to think about this. When Jesus was on the earth plane, just about a week or so before he was crucified, went through that horrible death, he went up into the woods away from the healing meeting, and Moses, who had been dead about 1,400 years, and Elijah, who had been dead about 800 years, materialized and had a conversation with Jesus. My question to those out there listening, who saved those two people?
Okay.
Who was on the earth plane that saved them?
Right.
You understand?
So there are people here before Jesus, so he
That's
cannot
right.
be the only one that we
That's
have to
right.
acknowledge.
This was created by the church. This was created by the theologians of the past.
Okay. Thank you. We ended our show on a little bit of a hot note, but that's okay. Stick with us next week, Women in the Bible, and we're going to continue with that topic. I thank our experts on the panel tonight, Sidney Schwartz and Reverend Carl Hewitt.
Thank you.
And I thank you,
Thank you.
viewers, and tune in to the end of the show to see the credits for a phone number to call or an email address to write to. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Be well.